Chapter 20, The Art of the Fake. When they met Christina in her office, she greeted them in a flush of excitement. "Oh, here you are. I've been thinking about this all day." She gave James's shoulder a quick pat and beamed at him. "I still can't believe my luck in finding you, James." James shyly smiled, staring at his sneakers. "Oh, I know," Christina laughed. "It's embarrassing." "I do this to my nieces all the time. I'm sorry." Carl walked over to her desk. "Are those the girls in the photo?" Oh, yes, those are my sister's children, Katie and Eleanor." She looked at the picture, her eyes shining with affection. Marvin quickly climbed up James's collar for a better look at the photo. He liked the relaxed expression on Christina's face, the way her arms curled comfortably around the children. She looked different in the photo, unguarded. He remembered hearing Carl tell James once that it was hard for people to ever know what they really looked like. Reflections in mirrors weren't accurate, Carl said, because when you stared at yourself in a mirror, you subconsciously composed your face in a way that wasn't your natural expression. Marvin wondered if that was true when you were with strangers, too. Maybe you only looked like your true self with the people that you loved. And maybe that was a face you hardly ever got to see, except in photos like this one. Carl lifted the frame. "The little one looks exactly like you." Christina smiled. "Doesn't she? And Eleanor is the spitting image of my sister's husband. Have you noticed how that happens sometimes? The genes of the parents seem to sort themselves out and the children look like one side or the other. I told Lily she saved me the trouble of having children." Carl tousled James's hair. "Well, it's not so much trouble, really." "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," Christina said quickly, glancing at James. "Anyways, it's the kind of trouble that I would have enjoyed." Christina seemed to turn shy suddenly, bowing her head to focus on a stack of papers on the desk. "Okay, these are from Denny. They're blank manuscript pages, old ones from the 16th century. That's the trick to forgeries. Everything has to date correctly and show the right signs of wear." Carl frowned. "But I thought you said it didn't need to be an exact copy, since you don't have to convince a collector, just some underworld art thief." "Oh, that's right." Christina turned reassuringly to James. "Your drawing will pass for the real thing, James. I'm sure of it. But we don't want anything on the surface to be a dead giveaway." She gently lifted the pages and set them on the table, removing the parchment overlay. The sheets were yellowed and tattered at the edges, marked by odd discolorations and blemishes. Marvin thought they showed every bit of their 500 years. "The best forgers are meticulous about their materials," Christina continued. "They use old paper taken from books or manuscripts of the time period. They match the historic shades of ink. They age the work with tears and smudges. There's no surer sign of a fake than an image that's too perfect." I think that should have been tears and smudges. I misread that. Carl nodded. "Anything that real has flaws." "Exactly. And in the art world, oddly enough, the flaws are what show its value." James looked at the pages on the table. "But what about my pen and ink set? It's not old. Can we still use that?" Marvin thought, flexing his front legs. A trill of anticipation coursed through him. "If the drawing had to pass inspection by an expert, no. But James, you're still able to make such delicate lines with that pen of yours. So like Dürer's." "What about the ink?" Carl asked. "The ink has to be brown, as it is in the original drawing. I've been working on that for the past couple of days. I do have a sample to try, James. We may need you to do the drawing more than once to get it right. Okay?" James nodded. "Okay, then." Christina faced the broad wooden table. "Let's set you up here. The museum closes shortly, and then Denny's going to bring you the original Fortitude." "The real one?" James turned to his father, looking worried. Carl raised his eyebrows. "Can you do that? Just take it off the wall? There's no alarm system?" "Not during the day, just the guards. We move artwork all the time," Christina answered. She twisted a strand of hair, watching James. "What is it, James? Are you nervous?" Marvin looked at James's pale face. He was biting his lip. Christina touched his shoulder, and Marvin dove for cover under the jacket collar. "Don't worry," she said reassuringly. "The drawing is protected by glass. You can't hurt it. I hope not, Marvin thought. He was trembling with excitement. He'd get to see it up close, finally, the real drawing. Okay, James said in a small voice. Christina squeezed his arm. I'll check on Denny, she said, and fetch the ink. As soon as she left, James looked at his father. What if I break it or spill ink on it? Marvin cringed, thinking how often Mrs. Pompaday cautioned James not to spill. Carl laughed. You won't, buddy. It's in a frame, under glass. We'll make sure it's safe. But, Dad, it's like a masterpiece, right? Carl considered this. Well, it's not the Mona Lisa. It's not the Sistine Chapel. James looked at his father, puzzled. What makes those masterpieces and not this one? Marvin felt compelled to crawl out from under James's collar to hear the answer to that question. I didn't say that. A masterpiece is a great work of art. It's the best of an artist's work, one of a kind. Carl rubbed his beard. But sometimes people don't recognize a masterpiece for years and years, long after the artist has died. He hesitated. It can be hard to say what makes one work stand out from the rest. What makes the Mona Lisa so special? On one level, it's just a picture of a woman smiling. James shrugged. It is just a picture of a woman smiling. But on another level, it's so much more, his father said. It's full of secrets. Is she proud, sorry, flirting, in love? Look at it long enough and you might come to your own answer. But it's a painting that can be seen in 100 different ways. He smiled a little. By that standard, Fortitude could be a masterpiece. I guess. A tiny masterpiece. Yeah, James said, satisfied. Marvin gulped, wondering how it was going to feel to copy a masterpiece, or to try to copy a masterpiece. Not long after Carl and James's conversation, Christina appeared with Denny, who was carrying something wrapped in a large white cloth. Denny's eyes sparkled. Hello, friends, he greeted. And now, the thing you've been waiting for. He carefully removed the cloth and set Fortitude in the middle of the table. Marvin inched forward for a better look. He caught his breath. The lines were as strong and fine and lovely as he remembered. The girl gripped the lion fearlessly. The lion reared up in her arms. James's voice was scarcely more than a whisper. Is it worth a lot of money? Christina nodded. We paid close to $700,000 for justice. Durer's virtues date from the early 1500s, which make them rare and even more valuable than most of the old master drawings. Denny nodded, his fingers lingering on the drawing's frame. The Getty was very lucky to get this one, the small size, the excellent condition, the detail which is truly exquisite. More than 1,000 Dürer drawings survive, but his virtues are in a class of their own. He paused. There is a romance to them. James looked up at him. What do you mean? Well, justice, for example. It's a universal ideal. Civilizations depend on it. Wars are fought over it, and people die for it, or the lack of it. Christina reached for the dusty volume of Dürer prints and thumbed through it quickly. There's a wonderful Plutarch quote. Do you know what it is, James? Philosopher. Who that is, James? Philosopher and historian in ancient Greece. She scanned the pages. Here it is. Justice is the first of virtues, for unsupported by justice, valor is good for nothing, and if all men were just, there would be no need for valor. What's valor? Asked James. Bravery, Carl said. Courage, or fortitude, Denny added thoughtfully. So Plutarch is saying, if everyone were fair, you wouldn't need anyone to be brave. Christina nodded. The Greeks thought the 4 cardinal virtues were related to one another. It was impossible to master one without mastering them all. Denny smiled. Now Nietzsche, on the other hand, he turned to James, famous German philosopher, thought the opposite. He thought the virtues were incompatible. He said you couldn't be wise and brave, for instance. Marvin crawled back under the shadow of James's collar to contemplate all of this. It had been brave to show himself to James at the beginning of this whole adventure, after he had made the drawing, but it hadn't been very wise, probably. He thought of Durer's 4 drawings: justice, fortitude, temperance, prudence. If you had to choose one virtue, which would be the most important? Was it better to be wise or brave? Reasonable or fair? Marvin decided that the answer to that question might depend on your situation. Are you ready, James? Denny asked. He raked his fingers through his gray hair and smiled encouragingly. I guess, James said. Marvin thought he didn't sound ready at all. Carl walked around the table to stand next to him, studying the drawing. Don't worry, James, Christina said. It's more important to be relaxed than to make an exact copy. The key to a good forgery is that sense of ease, making the lines smooth and fluid, not halting. Do you know what I mean? She crouched next to James, and Marvin immediately scooted farther under the collar, remembering the last time she'd caught sight of him. He could smell her mild, soapy scent, and he noticed again how lovely she was, with her smooth cheeks and shining hair. Denny said softly, Every detail tells a story. It talks to you. Together they all gazed at Fortitude. Clutching the jacket fabric, Marvin noticed the tension in the girl's sturdy body, the way the line seemed to both lunge and recoil at the same time. A breathless hush settled over the room. The noise of rush-hour traffic on the street below seemed miles and miles away. Marvin felt as if they'd all been hypnotized. Finally, Denny spoke. Dürer's paintings can sometimes seem quite cold, he commented, still transfixed, but not his drawings. His drawings are full of humanity. Christina paused, but there's always something held back. It's almost as if he couldn't bear to expose his tender imagination. Marvin understood that feeling. It was as though in his subjects, Dürer saw something unbearably fragile and beautiful, and he had to steel himself to protect it from the heartless world. After a minute, Christina turned back to James, her voice coaxing and gentle. All right, James, take as long as you need. We'll check back in an hour or so, okay? Here's the brown ink. She slid a small glass jar across the table and carefully positioned one of the manuscript pages next to it. Oh, and let me clean off your pen. You can't have any trace of your old ink on it. She opened the flat case and lifted James's pen from its snug resting spot, motioning Denny toward a bottle of clear fluid on her desk. Denny, pass me that, will you? Christina poured the solution onto a handkerchief and dabbed at the metal nib of the fountain pen. Then she placed the pen back in its case, turning to James expectantly. Okay? Carl bent to hug him. What do you say, buddy? All set? Yes, James answered. This time, Marvin noticed, his voice didn't waver at all. Good man, Denny declared, and with that, the three adults left the room.